It was one of those rare mornings in Ottawa when the fog over Parliament Hill seemed symbolic. Something was shifting in the air, something few expected. For months, Canada and the United States had been locked in a bitter trade war, tariffs slamming back and forth like pucks in an endless hockey game. Farmers were nervous, exporters frustrated, and ordinary families felt the sting of rising prices. Every headline told the same story. Canada was fighting back against Donald Trump's tariffs with retaliatory measures of its own. And then, just like that, Canada made a move nobody saw coming. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped before cameras on Friday and announced that Canada would be dropping many of its retaliatory tariffs on American goods. At first glance, the decision seemed almost like surrender. After all, wasn't the whole point of a trade war to hit back equally hard? Was Canada backing down? The opposition in Parliament immediately whispered the word weakness. Commentators wondered if Canada had lost its nerve, but Carney's calm voice suggested something else entirely. "Before you call this surrender," he told reporters, "understand what just happened behind the scenes." Behind those words lay weeks of carefully calculated strategy, secret phone calls, and a dramatic shift in Canada's approach to the trade war with Trump. And it all started with a single phone call the night before. For weeks, the line between Ottawa and Washington had gone silent. Trump had stopped taking Carney's calls. Statements from the White House were sharp, even hostile. The Canadian economy was under growing pressure, and many feared that Washington had no intention of negotiating seriously. But on Thursday night, Mark Carney finally got Donald Trump on the line. According to the Prime Minister's office, the conversation was productive and wide-ranging. That may sound diplomatic and vague, but in the language of international politics, it meant something important. The leaders didn't just rehash old grievances. They explored opportunities. They spoke of shared priorities. They discussed not just tariffs, but a new economic and security relationship. The call, according to insiders, was unlike any other exchange between the two men since Trump entered the White House. Within hours, Canada's response was clear. Carney wasn't caving. He was pivoting. To understand this shift, Carney reached for something every Canadian understands: hockey. "This is a strategic shift," he said, using a metaphor about playing the puck, not the player. Canada, in other words, wasn't giving up the fight. It was changing the game. Instead of matching Trump blow for blow with retaliatory tariffs, which often hurt Canadian businesses as much as American ones, Canada would now focus its firepower on a handful of strategic sectors where mutual benefits were undeniable and where leverage could be real. Carney explained it this way: retaliatory tariffs had served their purpose. They showed Washington that Canada would not sit back passively while the U.S. imposed steel and aluminum duties. But now, the time had come to adjust, to lock in gains where Canada had leverage, and to open the door to a broader negotiation. What did that mean in practice? It meant removing some retaliatory tariffs on American goods that had proven more painful for Canadian importers and consumers than for U.S. exporters. But it also meant doubling down on sectors where Canada's bargaining position was stronger: steel, aluminum, and other industries deeply integrated into North American supply chains. By focusing narrowly, Canada was signaling two things. It was ready to negotiate, but it would not abandon its workers. Reporters pressed Carney after his announcement. "Do you have assurances from the Americans that this will kickstart negotiations?" asked Olivia Stefanovich of CBC. Carney, unusually candid, replied, "Yes." Trump, during their call, had agreed to reopen channels for negotiation. That admission changed everything. For months, Trump's administration had insisted Canada bend entirely to American demands. But now, the U.S. president had effectively acknowledged Canada's leverage. Still, not everyone in Canada was convinced. Provincial premiers, especially those from regions hardest hit by U.S. tariffs, had called for even stronger retaliatory measures. To them, easing tariffs looked like weakness. Carney's response was careful, but firm. He praised the premiers for their collaboration, noting how federal and provincial governments had worked together to support affected industries. In the steel sector, for example, Ottawa and Ontario had provided liquidity and capital support to keep plants alive and workers employed. But the bigger point, Carney stressed, was fairness. In the end, what we all want is to make sure those strategic sectors get fair access to the U.S. market, he said. Matching what the U.S. did was fair. Dropping tariffs that didn't advance Canada's position was strategic. The goal was not to punish for punishment's sake, but to secure an enduring agreement that benefited both economies. This was not surrender, it was recalibration. The broader context matters here. Since the moment Trump took office, the U.S. and Canada had been on a collision course over trade. Trump's America First agenda targeted allies and rivals alike. Canada, historically America's closest trading partner, suddenly found itself lumped in with adversaries, facing tariffs on steel and aluminum supposedly justified by national security. Ottawa's initial response had been sharp, dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs designed to send a message. But over time, cracks began to show. Canadian businesses dependent on American supply chains suffered. Consumers paid higher prices. Carney, ever the economist, saw the danger of a prolonged stalemate. What he unveiled Friday was his answer. A hockey-style pivot. A redirection of Canada's strategy from broad retaliation to targeted leverage. It was a gamble, but one grounded in economic realism. For Trump, who thrives on confrontation, the shift was unexpected. For Canada, it was a chance to seize the initiative. The new approach reframed the trade war not as endless tit-for-tat tariffs, but as a negotiation about strategic sectors. It created space for talks while keeping pressure on the areas that mattered most. The coming weeks will reveal whether Trump honors his word. But for now, one thing is clear. Canada has not surrendered. It has changed tactics. And in trade wars, as in hockey, the team that adapts often wins. The symbolism of this moment cannot be overstated. Canada, long seen as America's quieter partner, has shown it can innovate strategically in the face of economic aggression. Carney, once a central banker, has proven himself a political strategist as well, willing to shift the field of play rather than stay trapped in Trump's game. As Carney himself said, the agreement supports it, but the economics drives it. In other words, Canada's strategy isn't built on bravado or bluster. It's built on cold economic logic. And that may be exactly what gives Ottawa the edge in the months to come. For Canadian workers in steel towns, for farmers watching trade routes shift, for consumers worried about prices at the grocery store, this story is not abstract. It touches their daily lives. Tariffs are not just numbers. They are jobs, paychecks, dinner tables. By shifting strategy, Canada is trying to protect not only its economy, but also the families who live within it. And so, the fog over Parliament Hill begins to lift. The trade war with Trump is far from over, but Canada has made its move. Not surrender, not weakness, strategy. The puck has dropped on a new period of play, and the outcome may well reshape North America's economic future.